I almost destroyed a perfectly healthy engine without even touching it. Not from an accident, not from years of neglect, from 30 days of doing absolutely nothing. And the part that still keeps me up at night, the warning signs were there from the very first morning. I just didn't know what I was looking at. By the time I figured it out, I understood something about cars that 6 years of daily driving had never taught me. Stay with me through this entire video, because what I found on day 30 is not what I expected, and it is not what you are expecting right now either. If this is the kind of content that makes you think differently about your car, hit subscribe right now, because everything on this channel is real. No sponsorships, no staged results, just what actually happened, and no, this wasn't a dead battery. That would have been easy. This was something I never saw coming, from a direction I never thought to look. So let me take you back to day 0. The last time I drove the car before everything started. It was a completely ordinary Tuesday. Drove to work, parked, drove home. No warning lights. No strange sounds. Engine felt exactly like it always had, smooth, responsive, completely normal. I parked in the driveway, went inside, and that was it. That was the last time I touched the car for 30 days. Work became relentless. A colleague was driving me in. I kept telling myself, tomorrow I'll take it out. Tomorrow became next week. Next week became the end of the month. And then one Saturday morning I was standing in the driveway looking at a car I hadn't started in 30 days. What I didn't know, what nobody ever actually explains, is that the moment you park a car and walk away, a slow, invisible countdown begins. Not dramatic. Not immediate. Just quiet, systematic degradation happening inside every single system while you're not watching. And by day 30, that countdown had reached 0 on multiple systems at the same time. That combination is exactly what made this situation so dangerous. The first thing I noticed was the front left tire. It looked wrong, not flat, not even close to flat, but the profile sat slightly lower than I remembered, maybe half an inch toward the ground. I pressed my thumb into the sidewall. It gave, soft, not the firm resistance a properly inflated tire should push back with. I made a mental note. I kept going. I should have stopped right there and checked everything before I even got in the car. That was mistake number 1. I sat down, put the key in, and turned it. The engine cranked. 1 second, 2 seconds, and then it caught, but it did not sound like my engine. It stumbled, lurched through a rough, uneven idle. The RPM needle swung high, dipped dangerously close to stalling, climbed back, and then held barely. I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel listening to a car that sounded like it had aged 10 years overnight. I gave it 2 minutes. By the time I backed out of the driveway, it felt almost normal. Almost. There was still a faint vibration through the wheel at low speed that I had never felt before. Light, rhythmic, easy to dismiss. So I dismissed it. I drove to the grocery store, came back, parked, went inside. That was mistake number 2. The next morning I went out again. And this time it was noticeably worse. The crank lasted 3 full seconds before ignition. The RPM needle dropped so low during startup that I held my breath expecting a stall. It didn't stall, but it took 90 seconds before the idle felt stable enough to put the car in gear. And this is where most people unknowingly cause serious damage to their engine. The car eventually smooths out. The idle settles. Everything feels fine by the time you pull out of the driveway. So you assume it is fine. You drive away, and the damage continues completely invisible until something finally fails in a way you cannot ignore. Then I heard it. Tick, 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 rhythmic, quiet, coming from somewhere deep inside the engine bay. If the radio had been on, I would have missed it completely. I turned the radio off and just sat there. The ticking continued for about 3 minutes and then slowly faded. The idle smoothed. The car felt normal again. And I almost drove away. I had my hand on the gear selector, ready to back out, when something made me stop. I do not fully know why I stopped, but I turned the engine off, got out, and opened the hood. At first, I thought it was nothing. Everything looked normal, oil level fine, coolant fine. No visible leaks, no obvious damage, just an engine sitting the way it always had. But then I reached down and touched the rubber vacuum hose running along the upper engine, a hose I had walked past 100 times without thinking about, and something immediately felt wrong. The rubber was stiff, not cracked, not broken. Just stiff in a way that rubber should not feel. I flexed it gently between my fingers, a faint creaking sound. I followed the hose to where it connected to the intake manifold and looked closer. And that's where I found it. A gap, hairline thin, right at the connection point between the hose and the fitting. Maybe 2 millimeters of separation where cold temperatures had contracted the rubber and pulled it slightly away from the intake. I want you to understand what 2 millimeters means to a running engine, because this is the part that almost cost me over $1,000. That gap smaller than the thickness of a fingernail was allowing unmetered air to bypass the mass airflow sensor and enter the intake manifold directly. The engine management system could not detect it, so it was calculating fuel delivery based on incorrect air data, running the combustion mixture lean. More air than the system knew about, less fuel than the engine actually needed, and a lean running engine on a cold start, with oil pressure still building and fuel trims trying to compensate in real time, produces exactly what I had experienced over 2 mornings: extended cranking, rough idle, low RPM instability, and that quiet vibration. At low speed that I had convinced myself was nothing. The fix for the hose took 90 seconds. I pushed it firmly back onto the fitting and secured it with a zip tie. At this point, I thought I had found the problem. I was wrong, and this is where most people would stop looking. Hose fixed, problem solved, move on. But here is the part I could not fix with a zip tie. The part that was already done silently, invisibly, over 2 consecutive mornings while I had no idea it was happening. But what I did not understand yet, and what I had to look up before I moved the car a single kilometer further, was what had actually been happening inside. The engine during those 2 extended cold starts, because the vacuum hose was not the only thing working against me. When an engine sits for 30 days, the oil film that normally coats every moving internal component, every camshaft lobe, every crankshaft bearing, every valve stem and lifter slowly drains back down into the oil pan. Within hours of shutdown, the upper engine is sitting dry, completely uncoated, just bare metal surfaces waiting for the next startup. And this is the part nobody tells you because you cannot see it happening, under normal conditions, when you start a car that was driven recently. Oil pressure builds within about 2 seconds and the engine is protected almost immediately, but after 30 days of sitting, those first 2 to 3 seconds of cranking are metal contacting metal with absolutely zero lubrication between them. That ticking I heard now, I knew exactly what it was. Hydraulic lifters, small but critical components in the upper valvetrain that depend entirely on oil pressure to function. After 30 days without circulation, they were running dry against the camshaft. That rhythmic ticking was the sound of wear happening in real time, microscopic, cumulative, and invisible from the outside. The kind of wear that does not show up on a dipstick, does not trigger a warning light, does not make any sound at all once oil pressure builds. It just silently shortens the life of components that are supposed to last the full life of the engine. If I had continued driving without finding that vacuum hose, without understanding what those extended cranking sessions were doing to the upper engine, I had called 2 shops and described exactly what I experienced. Both of them said the same thing without hesitation: bring it in. We need to look inside. One of them estimated the inspection and potential valvetrain service at between $900 and $1,300 depending on what they found. I was one bad drive away from a 4-figure repair, and I had almost taken that drive. But I still had not checked the one thing that could have ended this story very differently. When I put an actual gauge on all 4 tires, not just looked at them, but measured, what I found was the part that shocked me the most. Not the engine, not the hose, the tires. Front left, 24 psi. Front right, 27 psi. Rear left, 26 psi. Rear right, 28 psi. The recommended pressure for my car is 35 psi. Every tire was significantly underinflated. The front left, the one I had noticed looking slightly soft on the very first morning and then ignored, had lost 11 pounds of pressure over 30 days from a slow bead leak I had never properly caught because under normal driving I was topping it up without realizing. I had already driven to the grocery store at full speed on a front tire at 24 psi. I need you to understand what that actually means. A tire 11 psi below its recommended pressure, at highway speed, generates heat in the sidewall at a rate that can, under the wrong road conditions, on the wrong day, cause catastrophic delamination. Not a gradual flat, a sudden, violent sidewall failure at speed. The kind that causes accidents, and the car had felt completely normal the entire time. It always does, right up until it doesn't. Nothing exploded, nothing failed catastrophically. But the part that genuinely unsettled me sitting in that driveway with a pressure gauge in my hand was how close it had come to being a completely different story. A tire failure at highway speed. An engine pushed into repeated dry starts until something inside gave out without warning. A repair bill I was not prepared for. All of it happening simultaneously. All of it invisible. All of it from 30 days of simply not driving. The total cost to fix everything I found: fresh oil change, fuel system cleaner, proper tire inflation and bead inspection, vacuum hose secured, was $63, against a realistic outcome of over $1,000. This is how a small mistake quietly turns into a four-figure problem. Here is what I know now. 5 things. If you ever need to leave your car sitting for more than 2 weeks, these are the difference between a car that starts normally when you return and one that has quietly damaged itself while you were gone. Change the oil before you park. Clean oil holds its protective film significantly longer than degraded oil. Fill the fuel tank completely. Less airspace means less oxidation and moisture accumulation. Set all 4 tires to the top of the recommended pressure range. They will lose 1 to 2 psi per month under normal conditions, more with temperature swings, and you need that buffer. Connect a battery maintainer if you have access to power. 30 days of sitting can pull an older battery below reliable cranking threshold. And the one that nobody ever mentions: the day before you park, drive the car properly. Highway speed, full operating temperature, 30 minutes minimum. Let the engine burn off moisture, bring the oil to full heat, fully charge the battery. Then, park it. A warm, fully serviced car handles sitting far better than one that was simply abandoned without warning. The car recovered completely. After proper warm-up cycles over the following week, the ticking disappeared. The idle normalized. The fuel trims corrected. The throttle response came back to exactly where it had always been. No permanent damage as far as I can tell, because I caught it when I did. But I think about those first 2 seconds every time I start the car now. The seconds before oil pressure builds. The seconds when the engine is running on nothing but what was left on the metal surfaces from the last time it ran. After 30 days of sitting, those seconds are longer, harder, and more consequential than anything else that happens in a normal drive. Be honest, what is the longest you have ever left your car sitting? Drop it in the comments, because after this, you might not do it again. A parked car does not wait for you. It changes every single day, on its own schedule, without asking for permission. The only question is, do you find out early, or do you find out when it is already too late?